I said to a friend last night that I am tired of feeling embarrassed or ashamed or less Asian because my Chinese isn't as good as it should be. I do think that is a core part of being Asian American. We're othered here, but we're also othered in Asia. We stand out as much in Asia as we do stand out here. And and it's frustrating to deal with for sure. There's a lot of internal judgment among Asian Americans with this sort of othering. It's kind of like we're othering each other based on how connected someone might be to Asia or America, or rather, more generally, the East versus the West. Some have had the privilege to go back to Asia many times. I certainly have. Some have never been back. Some are tied into the culture in some ways, some are not, right? And whether this is a conscious choice or part of our upbringing, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we should not be othering each other, right? Like, um, we're already foreign to both these cultures in at least one way. The way that I like to see it is that our mothers or our grandmothers or even ourselves have made this journey from the east to the west across the Pacific. And maybe we've gone back and then we've come back as well, right? And so, however many times we made this journey, at some point, me or my ancestors have been above the Pacific, across the Pacific. And I like to see it that each of us Asian Americans are placed somewhere along the Pacific. My mom's side of the family immigrated to Massachusetts, so it would be somewhere between Taiwan and Massachusetts. But there's also parts of the story before and after that initial move. I went back to Shanghai for high school. My dad's side of the family was originally from Shanghai, and so like there are all these pieces to the puzzle that draw us further towards Asia or further towards like the California shores. And so each of us is placed in this unique, like latitude, longitude coordinate over the Pacific. But more likely than not, we will be closer to other Asian Americans who are placed at different places in the Pacific than we would be to any of the coasts. And that to me is the way that I'm thinking about it. We're all different and we all have different stories and different connections to the East or the West, but we're still closest to each other because we walk both worlds. We understand this struggle between balance and excess, between growing up, immersed in Western culture, but also immersed in Eastern culture in one way or another. And then as we grow older, I think a lot of Asian Americans, we begin making these choices of what sort of cultures we want to engage more or less in, right? I wasn't part of any sort of Asian American, student organization when I was in college, and that's something that I kind of wish that I could go back and change. I've heard from some friends who are in Asian American student organizations that they were looking for that sense of community that they never had in their small town that they grew up in. And for me, like, because I spent time in Shanghai, for me, like, being Asian wasn't really a big part of my identity, I guess, right? Because I was surrounded by Asian people. I was literally in Asia. I was in Shanghai. That's totally okay, right? But like as I immerse more time in America, I'm just like starting to, I guess, re-notice the things that make me Asian American. If you think about it, the entire term Asian American is fascinating. It I used to not like it because it kind of generalizes so many different cultures. It also excludes a lot of countries and cultures, right? Like when someone says Asian American, a lot of times they're really thinking Eastern Asian, and so then Southeast Asians, South Asians are often excluded. So point is, I've never liked it. You know, both the generalizing and the exclusion part of it. But I've realized that the entire idea of it, and this was probably, you know, like the whole purpose of the writers and the scholars that came before us, this was probably one of the reasons why they came up with this term in the first place, is because we're stronger together, right? Because we have this shared story of diaspora, either of refugee or of searching for opportunity, and because we grew up in this mixed hybrid world where we understand both Eastern and Western like mindsets to some extent. We all do. Just this idea of Asian Americanness, that hyphen, or I guess maybe there's not a hyphen, I'm not entirely sure, in itself, an identity on its own. And this might seem as kind of like an obvious reminder, but I do think that it is important to remind ourselves that our identity is what makes us unique and therefore gives us power. You know, even day-to-day things for me, right? Like the fact that my Chinese is this weird hybrid accent of like American, but also Taiwanese, because that's how I speak in my family, and also like a little bit of that mainland or Shanghai accent. Or the fact that I can order verbally at a restaurant, but I can't really read the menu. Or I know, you know, some simplified and some traditional. Or that I don't really know which one of like the tea things, you know, like when people like ask for tea, there's like the knocking one, and there's a 2-finger one, and there's like the 1-finger one, but like everybody does it differently, and I'm not really entirely sure which one is rude and which one is like, you know, what I should be doing, right? It's like things like that. I'm kind of sick of being embarrassed and like kind of ashamed of it, right? It's like, this is me, you know, this is who we are, and I'm just gonna own up to it, right? I don't even know what language I'm speaking with my parents half the time. We just kind of jump between English and Chinese all the time. And honestly, that's like a privilege, right? And although I'm insecure about it, I feel like a lot of people grow up and don't have that same sort of immersion to Asian culture, which is like, you know, I think neither good or bad, right? Whether our exposure to Asian culture is understanding the language, understanding the culture, the way that people think, you know, like things like filial piety, right? To me feel like pretty kind of burned into my soul. But I've talked to a lot of Asian Americans who are like, well, yeah, that's just kind of like feels very outdated. And things like family, I think, are incredibly important. And I'm very, very grateful to feel like I have that Asian family feel. Both the good and bad parts of it, for sure. Anyways, point is, we are all somewhere above the Pacific. And although, you know, we might look around and it might seem like we're alone, if you kind of zoom out, all of us are above the Pacific. Hundreds and thousands of us are above the Pacific. And that's pretty cool, right? It's really, really cool to be able to understand both cultures in a way that is just innate and natural to us. And also to be curious about both and understand why we feel this pull towards one or the other, you know, and then understand how that shapes both how we were raised and how we choose to see and act in the world today. I think it's really fascinating, and it's something. It's absolutely something to be proud of. I certainly am.